Hi, I am so excited today to share my friend Heather Haupt with you and the wisdom that she has to share to you moms. We're so excited to have her here today. Heather, I know I met you on the speaking circuit years ago, and I've witnessed you encouraging young moms, and that's what my heart is. I love encouraging young moms, and that's why I wanted you on this show today, so that you can encourage people too. So first of all, just tell me a little bit about your family. How many kids do you have, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I am excited to be here because I love to encourage young moms too, because we are training up the next generation and our role is so very crucial. I have 5 kids now, so ranging in age from 17 down to 20 months. Wow. So we got a little bonus blessing in 2020, which was really fun. I got a licensed driver and a baby all in the same year. So
I know how that is. How many girls, boys?
So I have 3 boys. In fact, I tell people I had 3 boys in 3.5 years, and it was a don't blink season for years. And then 3.5 years after my 3rd boy, I had a little girl, and she actually prayed for years for a sister. I'm like, oh, honey, I think God shut that door, but you can pray for a miracle because we believe in a God that performs miracles. And then sure enough, shortly before her 10th birthday, she got a little sister. So.
Wow, that's great. Heather has written books. Today, we're going to ask her about a book she wrote called Knights in Training. And Heather, can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, well, I wrote it. It actually was birthed out of a homeschool lesson when my oldest was 7. So I had a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And we were studying the Middle Ages. And I was like, you know what? We are going to study chivalry because I wanted my boys to treat the women in their life with respect. And at that time, I thought chivalry was just how a man treats a woman, opening doors for the ladies, and which are all good things to do to treat the women in their life with love and respect. But when I went to research it, I was blown away by how much more it was. It was so much deeper. It actually ended up being this unwritten code of conduct that the men of old were drawn to and were encouraged to seek after. In fact, this training became so important. It was a way initially to train the warrior class, to civilize them, that the noblemen of the day said, oh, we want this training for our sons. And as I was looking at it, I said, these principles are timeless, and I want this for my boys. I want to raise up boys like this because that is what our culture needs. And so I made a list of 10 items from the code. I'm like, okay. And I put it up on our wall and I called my little boys over and I said, we are going to become knights. And they're like, what? With swords and everything? And I said, yes, with swords and everything. But in order to be a knight, you have to live by the code. And so I started reading through it. You will love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You will obey those in authority over you. You will defend and protect. You will stand against those who are hurting the weak. And so I started going through that, and the transformation was visible as my boys are taking it in and they're like, we can do this. We can do this right now. And I realized that I was onto something. And so I blogged about it. And we had a lot of fun that year doing it. And then fast forward a few years, a reporter for the New York Times discovered that article and asked if she could interview me on a piece she was doing on manners. And I was like, okay, sure. And I didn't even really think anything of it until I got a call a week after the article went live on the New York Times. And I actually saw that they told everybody I had free curriculum on my website. I'm like, it is not free curriculum. It's a printable. It's like a 1-page thing. And so I had rustled up, made the post fresh so that people could find my little 1-page printable. But the president of Penguin Random House saw it and was like, this needs to be a book. And so that sort of started the process of fleshing it out, which gave me a chance to share my heart for boys, because I love our boys and our culture is toxic to young boys. And so we want to raise up boys who are strong, and we want to play to their strengths and how God wired them. but then also sort of recognize these are some of the weaknesses that can go with those strengths, and how do we give them a vision for the future? And so it was just such a privilege to be able to write that out and really give parents a framework and something to aim for that reached the hearts of their sons.
Moms might be thinking, why shouldn't we want to raise typical boys? How would you answer that?
I remember talking to a lady when I was first getting ready to start the book, and she goes, "Oh yeah, I do not want to raise a typical boy." And in her mind, it was someone who was a brat. They were violent. They were gross. And so we see that in the culture at large, and we go, no, we don't want that. But I think also we fail to recognize that boys are active and they need to move and they long for adventure, and they're going to pick up that banana in the grocery store and turn it into a gun. And that's not something evil. But we want to give them direction with that and clue into their desire to defend and protect. And so yeah, we look and we go, we don't want boys that are sitting at home in their parents' basement, not moving out into adulthood. But we need to recognize that boys are just different, and to expect them to sit still like little girls is unfair, and it actually backfires on us, and we get some of these problems that everybody is seeing.
It's so true. I have 6 boys and 8 girls, and they were so different raising them. I remember one of my sons, once we were trying to do math, and he said, "Mom, can I go outside and jump on the trampoline and wake up my brain?" I said, "Yes, please do." They're just different. They need to move. Why should parents be leery of allowing their boys to watch some of the movies? You had mentioned Frozen. I have not actually watched that myself. I'm not sure I would let my girls watch that either, but what would be your
I think when it comes to movies, we need to recognize that we become what we consume. And I think we all think, no, we're just going to watch it and it's just a fun thing to watch. And so we don't really realize that the messages that are being conveyed, that we're passively accepting them. And so it doesn't take more than a cursory look at most of the movies that are coming out these days to realize that they treat boys as bumbling idiots or power hungry and evil, which is why I used Frozen as an example, because in that movie, the 2 main male leads one was a bumbling fool who just sort of accidentally made it his way through in spite of himself and thanks to the ladies in his life. And the other one was power hungry and evil. And I was looking at that going, oh, neither of those alternatives work. And actually, when you were mentioning your girls, do we really want this presented to our daughters as you get to pick the bumbling fool who at least isn't going to hurt you, or the power hungry evil person that's out to step on you for his own gain? And this is where it's relentless when we see it in the media. And so we just want to be careful. And that's where, we watched it, and we watched it once. And I was like, okay, we talked about it, we're done. But we don't make a steady diet of it, because if that's what you're taking in over and over and over again, it shapes what you believe about yourself. It shapes what you believe about other people, and what you believe about God. The ramifications are huge.
They are. And, we used to try to teach our kids to be discerning watchers. What do you see in this movie that's not aligning with God's principles? So we want to teach our kids to think it through and not just believe whatever they see. We raised our kids without a TV, and I don't have any regrets about that.
Yeah.
Some people feel that playing with weapons promotes violence. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I live in Virginia now, and all boys have guns and they hunt, and that's just the way of life. But in Massachusetts, it was not that way. So why do you think it's beneficial for boys to engage and play in warfare?
I think we need to recognize the heart of a boy. And this is where, especially as mothers, there's a lot of times that we just don't get it. We don't get this deep-seated desire to defend and to protect and to provide. Yeah. And so guns provide a way to protect the people in your life, your family. They provide a way to provide food for your family. And so when we vilify this, again, because of what the culture is portrayed with guns, we truncate this inborn budding desire of what does it mean to be a man? How do I defend and protect? How do I stand up for what is right? And so we need to recognize that when a boy is entering into these play scenarios where he is wanting to be the hero of the story, he's working out, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes to stand up in the moment and defend and protect the people that I love? And so we want to cultivate that. We want to celebrate that and not vilify it. Now, of course, we provide caveats. I will never forget the day that we had studied Davy Crockett and I let them watch the Disney Davy Crockett movie. And at the end, there's this big scene at the Alamo. And of course, of his entire life, my kids fixated on the Alamo. And so they run outside and they have their little coonskin caps, because I put that on our Christmas list. I knew we would be studying Davy Crockett. Yeah. And so they had their coonskin caps, and we actually did not have any toy guns at this point. But they had a stick horse and they had a baseball bat. And my two boys went and found their stick horse and their baseball bat, and they were in the top of our little plastic play structure, and they were defending the Alamo. And then suddenly their 18-month-old brother toddles out. And I was watching because I was making dinner, and it's like in unison, they saw him and they were like, and they both shifted their guns over and started shooting the 18-month-old. At which point I went out and I'm like, no, he's too young to decide to be the bad guy. So you can invite him up into the Alamo and he can be the sole survivor. And so we civilize it. We don't just give them carte blanche, but this is where this goes hand in hand with what kind of media we're giving to our kids. And so if we're giving our children good stories to feast their minds on, they're going to want to emulate good and worthy heroes. And so they're going to take that into their pretend play. And that's different than giving them carte blanche to watch whatever is the newest, latest, greatest thing without helping them to process that. And so that's where we need to make sure that we're providing direction, but we're not vilifying that inward desire to defend and protect.
Absolutely. I know with our boys, they took hunting safety courses and they took gun safety courses, and I wanted them, to know how to use them correctly. Actually, my girls did too, like how to defend yourself with a gun. And yeah, I think that's wise, to teach them those principles. Tell us, why is faith crucial to the code of chivalry? Some people may not be familiar with knights and what the code of chivalry is.
Faith is foundational. And so it was love for God that provided the rationale and a reason to live outside of yourself. And so what was happening in the Middle Ages is they would hire mercenaries, they would hire warriors, but they had no moral compass. And so they would just it was super easy for them to get distracted and to just kill for killing's sake or to turn. And so what they wanted was soldiers who were loyal, who did the right thing. And without connecting it to faith in something bigger than yourself, there's no accountability. It's just might makes right. And if you're the strongest person in the room, then you get to call the shots. And so that's where faith in God recognizes that God is bigger than you are, and that he is deserving of our allegiance, that he is deserving of our obedience, and that when we follow him, we get to have true adventure. And so that's where love for God was foundational to every other aspect of the code. How are you going to defend and protect? Who are you going to defend and protect? Well, God in his word provides lots of guidance for that. How do we treat the women in our life with love and respect? Well, God created us in his image, in the Imago Dei. And so when we recognize that, then we look at others and we don't give them value on how similar they are to us or whatnot, but we assign them value simply because they are created in the image of God and they are worthy of love and respect. And so that it provides the context and the reason and the rationale and a reason and rationale that doesn't change with circumstances. And so that's why that is it's crucial. And it was crucial to every single aspect of the code of chivalry and what made knights of the Middle Ages powerful. Now, they didn't all live perfectly. In fact, I remember a lady reaching out to me after my book came out, and she goes, I don't know if it was a cousin or something. She goes, my cousin is a medieval historian and knights did not live like this. And I responded back and I said, you're right. We have something called a fallen nature And we disobey, we mess up. Like that is the history of the human race since Adam and Eve. We mess up. What the code of chivalry provided was an ideal. It pointed us back. And so Geoffroy de Charnay was a knight in the 13th century, and he actually wrote a book on chivalry because what he was seeing is that the knights of his day, it was just unraveling. And they were just going out and wreaking havoc on villages and just taking things. And so it was a call back to, no, this is not who you are to be. You are to be this. And so it was a pointing to an ideal, a calling them back to, this is who God created you to be. You need to walk in this way. And that's where it provides that refocus factor. Not that every knight in the Middle Ages lived up to that, which any look around at today's day and age, and we see that people mess up on the regular. We all do, and we need reminders to live for something more.
And you had mentioned a protection against tyranny, and I think we have a lot of that in our culture today. How can this help kids to protect our freedoms that are fast disappearing?
Yeah, I think that's where we need to be grounded in the truth. And then we need to be preparing our children that it's their job as individuals to stand up for what is right. And that might does not make right. That right. The people in charge don't get to decide what is right. That we have a firm foundation in truth, and that guides and protects against just rampant injustice. Yeah. That happens when we forget and we lose our way.
That's so true. We've taught our kids about the Constitution, and, we've got rules in this country and they need to be followed, just like, the Knight's Code of Chivalry. And I think our kids need to be taught that so they can protect their freedoms today. Okay. How does chivalry and the world of knights help address some of the issues we're facing with integrity, lack of passion and purpose, entitlement?
Yeah. Well, again, especially with our boys, it goes back to recognizing who they are and speaking their language. And I think as moms, it's just really hard because they're so different than we are.
They are.
And those differences are good. So it's not like we're better or they're better. Society flourishes when we recognize each other's individual strengths and we work towards that end. And so what we need to do is recognize how to reach our boys. And so if I were to go to my sons and make the appeal like, oh, look, that boy looks so sad and lonely at the park, why don't you go invite him to play? I do have a super compassionate, I call him my Ferdinand the bull boy. And he might have gone over and been like, but in general, they just sort of go, well, he just needs to buck up and come over here and ask to play. We'll let him play, like, be a man, come on over and do that. Whereas if we flip how we're talking about it and we go over and we say, you know what, that boy looks new and he looks a little lonely. You have an opportunity to be the hero to him right now by going and inviting him to play. Suddenly we've changed the situation.
Yep.
And we've empowered our sons to play on their strengths. I can be the hero. I can go invite him to play. It makes it appealing because we've spoken their language.
Yep.
They can understand that. And we've done that over the years. In fact, we used to serve at our church on the welcome team, and it's cold. We're here in Texas, so weather is schizophrenic. It's either like super crazy hot and humid, or it's icy, and we just don't seem to know how to live with either extreme. And so our church had two sets of doors, and we would serve on the outside set, and the inside set would stay closed to either keep the hot air in or the cold air in, depending on the time of year. And so we would teach our sons to be on the lookout for who needed extra help, because our job was to greet, but then they could open that second set of doors. But if we saw an older couple coming up, my boys would know to step back and open up that door for them. If there was a young mom coming up with a stroller, they would step back. And I will never forget the day that we had this big strapping man. He was like 6'3", and he had a baby in one arm, and he was wrangling a 3-year-old with his other hand. And I was leaned over and I said, okay, that guy. And they're like, yes. I mean, because this guy, he was strong. And I was like, You get to be a hero to that guy. He needs help in this moment. And their eyes were huge and they were like, oh, we get to be the hero to him. and so again, just it changes how we view things. When we talk to our kids about perseverance and not giving up, even when it gets hard. Again, I think that's a weakness in our culture right now, is that if stuff it doesn't come to us on a silver platter, then we assume we've done something wrong. And we cut ties and we walk away. And we see that marriages, it gets tough, you walk away. Jobs, it gets tough, you quit and you go find something else. School's hard. Oh, that subject's not for you. You cut ties and you walk away. And what we need to do is come back to, you know what? No, we do hard things. And there is beauty in the struggle and in persevering, even when it's hard. And so when we connect that to the knights of old for a young boy, and we go, you know what? He didn't just do it when he felt like it. He was practicing so that he would be ready at a moment's notice and on the lookout for who needed help. And so again, it just provides structure that addresses the issues of entitlement, like everybody's out to serve me. It addresses the fact that people give up. It addresses the issues with a culture that's becoming increasingly crude and rude. Like that's just not how we treat other people, because they're created in the image of God. And so we treat them with love and respect.
I love that. I love the service aspect. We did that with our kids too, to teach them to look for needs of others that they could serve. I absolutely love that. Heather, are there differences between how a boy and girl might approach faith in God?
Yes. And this is always just so interesting. I think we as women tend to be connected to the relational aspects of God's character, that he is loving, that he is kind, that he is patient, and he is all of those things. For a young boy, men tend to be drawn to the fact that he is just, that he is strong, that he is almighty, that he is sovereign. Yeah. In fact, I remember coming across, talking to somebody and reading about how, like, when a man walks into a room, he will assess a room and go, can I take them? Or will they take me? Which is so weird. And I even asked my husband, and my husband is not like the big, tough, I'm going to take everybody on kind of guy. But he's like, yeah, I guess that's a little true. I'm like, okay. Because again, I don't think that way at all. Yeah. But so they say that a man does that. And when he walks in the room, he's assessing it. Well, God, for our boys, is that man in the room that no one can take. And yet he's the man that's completely on their side. And when they understand those aspects of his character, they're ready to lay down their lives, to lay down their will, and to serve the King Almighty. And so that's where we want to make sure that we're connecting these aspects to our son, not to the detriment of his other attributes, but recognizing that these are ones that are really influential and really touch their heart and their mind in a deep way.
And they're actually characteristics of Jesus, which we need to teach our kids the character of Jesus. And that's what you're doing. But there's certain ones, like I know my oldest son, justice is so important to him. He's a lawyer and he defends the Constitution. He defends the unborn. And I mean, that's just always been his heart since he was little, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. What does the term Imago Deo refer to?
The Imago Dei. Okay. And I had mentioned that earlier. It's an old Latin term that just means the image of God. And so again, it's this concept that recognizing that we're all created in the image of God, sort of like you mentioned with your son, like he's passionate about defending the unborn.
Yep.
Because they're created in the image of God and they're worthy of our love, respect, and protection and care. And so we don't just discard them because that life is inconvenient. It's a human life. And so that's what we want to do with our sons, is go back and connect. Why do we do all these things? Why do we defend and protect the weak? Well, because a person has worth and value, not because of what they contribute to society, but simply because they are human. And in a culture, I know this seems so basic, but our culture is ready to discard those that are not important. In fact, you've seen it. I mean, in the last couple of years, I've been watching going, And we wonder where like Nazi Germany got to where it was at. It was slow incremental moves and a devaluing of life that everybody just sort of was like, oh, well, that part's not that big a deal. Well, yeah, maybe. And then we got to a point where evil ran rampant.
Yeah.
So the same thing, and we're seeing, can totally happen here because it goes back to human nature, and we must inculcate into our children's hearts and souls and minds this idea that people have worth because they're created in the image of God.
Absolutely. I totally agree. We always taught our kids respect for the elderly. We see that too, like the elderly, it's okay if they die with coronavirus or whatever. I mean, it's just the unborn, the elderly. We took our kids to interview a lot of World War II vets so that they could appreciate the sacrifices that they'd made, but it built such an honor for these elderly people.
I love that.
That's so important. What are some of the ways parents can cultivate compassion?
Yeah. So again, it circles back to when we were talking about the idea of a boy and a weapon, the importance of play, of engaging the imagination is powerful. So we give them really good stories to feast on, stories from history, stories from legend, which a lot of the stuff with knights tends to have morphed into the realm of legend. But it has value because it shapes who we are and how we believe morally. And so we want to give our kids these stories, and then we want to encourage their jaunts into the realm of imaginative play, specifically for young children. Although I find even older kids can still, like, I will never forget being at a homeschool convention. And of course, if you've ever been there with Hal and Melanie Young and they've got all their swords at their booth, like it's a magnet for kids, and the kids are out there sword fighting, right? Even the teenage boys.
Yeah.
So there's the dads. I mean, it's like, it knows no age.
Yeah.
You want to do that. And so we look at that and we want to celebrate that. And so we encourage the giving of good stories, and then we encourage their jaunts into pretend play. And then again, we connect purpose to compassion. And so compassion, boys are action oriented. And so we connect, okay, here's something that we should be compassionate about, but not just in a, oh, I feel all the feels, but oh, what can I do about this? And any of us who have been married for any length of time knows that when we have something going on in our life and we go to our spouse, what does he want to do? He wants to help us fix the problem so that we're not in anguish. Like that's just how God wired our men to be. And so we want to give them opportunities to do that. How can you be a creative problem solver? How can you do that? And so in the context of talking about knights, not that you're going to do this all the time forever and ever, but I think initially when you're issuing a chivalry challenge is going, the knights of old, they didn't wait for somebody to come and say, oh, help, I need help over here. A knight was on the lookout. And so in my book, I talk a lot about situational awareness and being aware of your environment and what's going on so that you can be ready to step up.
That's great, having an alertness to what's going on. I also love, I guess we're going to address it in a little bit, but the heroes, like we've been really strong on teaching our kids about heroes. We've done a lot for the War of Independence because we felt like our kids needed to know the foundation of our country. But many a time I've walked in the room and found my kids and now my grandkids doing the Battle of Bunker Hill, or, they're play acting what they've been learning about. And that's so important. They internalize it when they can actually act it out. And we used to reward our kids for learning Bible verses with costumes. So we've got George Washington, all these different costumes, and Robert E. Lee, all these costumes. So anyway, I totally, and that's what kind of got us on recording books. My husband, Uncle Rick, records books that were written in the 1800s that taught character and chivalry and integrity. They taught all those things to kids, and we make them available to them. Okay, why do you feel it's important to discourage potty humor?
Yeah. So we love Uncle Rick books. Those are so much fun. And I think because I've met him, like I'll tell my kids stories and they're like, oh, yeah. But yeah, we need to give them these stories. We actually had a funny situation last week. My nieces and nephews are studying the Revolutionary War, and they were out at this Liberty Festival, and the one boy was like, touchy, 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 and pretending to do a sword fight. And my mom was really confused, and she goes, what are you doing? And we realized that this is a common homeschool problem where you're well read but poorly pronounced. And he was trying to say touche, touche. And he was trying to be Lafayette.
Oh, that's
But
great.
yeah, so now we're like, touchy, touchy.
That's great. That's probably how he thought it was pronounced. Like,
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
it
Anyway,
does.
oh, so potty humor. Oh, this is so very hard, I think. I mean, you have sons and then probably grandsons. I don't know
Yeah.
what your ratio is with grandchildren. There's something about little boys that they just become obsessed with bodily functions.
Yeah.
And again, our job as parents is to civilize them. So we don't like vilify them, but we provide direction. One of the problems that's going on in our culture is like our culture is desperate for boys to read. And so we've lost this semblance of reading history and reading things like that. And so they
It's a
look and they go,
shame.
it is a total shame.
Yeah.
And they look and they're like, oh, well, boys love potty humor, so we're going to write The Adventure of Captain Underpants
Yeah.
or, fart books. And what we do, again, by doing this, and I talked about it with having mindful media consumption, we become what we consume. And so
Yep.
if we give our children movies, if we give our children books that are filled with this kind of language, it solidifies in their mind that that is how a boy or a man talks.
Yep.
And again, we can get our kids up and reading without moving to this level of desperation. And so it always saddens me when I hear librarians or teachers just go, well, it's the only way to get a boy to read. And I just want to be like, no, it's not. Give them true historical heroes. Give them legends like the knights of old, and they will eat up those books. Give them books about battles. I have a boy who's totally battle wired. So all of my boys are different, which I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
So I have my Ferdinand the Bull. I have my one who is, he is a walking military historian. You want to know something about anything with fighting warcraft? He's your man. He can tell you intimate details that just boggle my mind. So I recognized that early on, and I would look for books on military history. And so his understanding and his historical depth is huge because of that. Now, not all of my boys read all those books I buy,
Yep.
but my military historian does. And then usually he's so enthusiastic, some of the other boys will be like, oh, well, let me try. And
Yeah. They pick stuff up from each other. And let me
yeah,
just mention there's a website called Abe Books, abebooks.com, and you can find the older books. You can find historical books that were written so that kids are entertained by them and enjoy them. So,
yes,
that stuff's out there and it's much better than the public library. Public library seems like they've gotten rid of the good stuff.
they have. Which is sad. It's a travesty. But my point is that we look and then we give them rules and guidelines. And so like when my kids were little, and I talk about this in the book, like there was no potty humor, not ever, at our
Yep.
dining room table. Um, if if you needed to pass gas or pick your nose, you went to the bathroom and you did it in private. And just talking to our boys again about reading a situation. Like there is something when you're out camping and in the woods, you're going to speak and behave in a way that's different than when you're in a formal dining situation.
Right.
And so teaching our boys even situational awareness, like being aware that, oh, this is a situation where we don't talk like that,
Yeah.
um, will help them for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. You're preparing them for their life, for the future. Okay. How do we raise independent boys in an age where boys don't seem to be growing up?
Ugh, yeah, it it is a huge problem. Um, I remember reading and going, is this really true? But yeah, boys are staying home far longer than their female counterparts. Fewer are going to and graduating from college. In fact, I remember reading that the age of marriage was later in life.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
I always thought it was because boys didn't want to settle down and be responsible. Um, but it's actually, when I was reading the stats, women don't want to marry these men because they're immature and they just want to transfer reliance on mom and dad to reliance on the wife or girlfriend and have them take care of them. And that's just, that might seem sort of cute for a little bit, but it's not cute long term.
Yeah.
And so that's where we want to look and go, we want to prepare to let go. And as moms, that can be really hard. And so I constantly circle back to, and I'm sure you've done it way more than I have, but I'll realize, oh, I'm holding on too tight. Let go. Let
Yeah.
go. They can do that. If they get hurt, it's okay. Like, you learn from your mistakes.
Right.
And so again, I mean, there's a part, especially when they're young, you inspire their imagination so that they see, they have real life examples of people who are making a difference in the world. So they have something to aim for. We build a culture in our homes primarily, and then also in our local communities that value men.
Yep.
And so I love to constantly highlight when I see men just flourishing in the way that God wired them. And I will point that out to my sons and go, whoa, look at that. That is so amazing.
That's great.
I'm so glad that he stepped up and helped in this situation. Or we were at a disc golf tournament this last weekend. Disc golf is my boys' sport, and they play in the adult leagues because there's just not a whole lot of kids that play. And there was a young father who had a 2-month-old son, and I was out there on these bumpy trails with a stroller, hoping that my
Oh,
20-month-old would sleep. And oh my gosh, that man, like, there was one part that was super bumpy, and he took my son's disc golf cart and he's like, go help your mom.
wow.
And I didn't know at the time that he had a 2-month-old son, but I was able to talk to my son afterwards. I'm like, did you see that? He anticipated my need before I even knew I had the need. He
Yeah.
saw it and then he made it so that you could help me. And so we celebrate that. We celebrate when we see care and concern and love and respect and defending and protecting and stepping up for the weak. So we highlight that. And then with our sons, we communicate respect. And respect is just so huge.
It
And
is.
so, and I think as parents, especially as mothers, we tend to get nitpicky. And so it's really easy to fix everything that's wrong and fail to notice when they're doing something right and celebrate that.
Yes.
And that's where
Totally
we
agree.
want to still address misbehavior, things that they're doing poorly, but we want to constantly look back to what are they doing right? What are they doing right? And then affirm them in that.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree. Okay, Heather, if you could choose only one point, what would you want your readers to take away from your book?
That life is challenging, that parenting is challenging. Each of our kids are unique. And so there's no manual. It's not like my book is a manual. Here's how to raise amazing, perfect boys. It provides guidelines. It provides inspiration. It provides a framework. And so my what I hope parents take away from my book is this idea of inspiring your children, that they can live a life of purpose, not only for that someday future season of manhood, but for that everyday season of boyhood that they find themselves in now, and then to just embrace the purpose in this season as parents.
I love it. I love it. Okay, Heather, how can people get your book? Tell them if you have a website, a blog, how can they
Yeah.
connect with you?
So you can get my book. So I've written most of my parenting articles are just at heatherhaupt.com. There's a link from that website to my cultivatedlearning.org store where I have all my homeschool stuff. But you can get my book there. We have a big poster that you can get with the code of chivalry, t-shirts, things like that to help you on your journey. Or you can find books just about anywhere where they're sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, For a long time, yeah, I would see them in the Barnes and Noble stores. So pretty much anywhere where books are sold, especially online, you're able to pick them up there.
We will post links too in the show notes so people can access your book and that poster. If you have specific links, you can send them to me and I'll just post them in the show notes.
Great, I can send those.
For what that noise is. Okay, Heather, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really inspiring. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.